God has taught me so many lessons through this work in Cambodia. I mean, on the leadership side, I've learned about the power of perseverance. I never thought it would take this long, but I'm glad we hung in there and we kept at it. I've learned about flexibility and adaptability. Like, there are all kinds of great leadership lessons that I've learned that I'm really, really grateful for. Personally, the first trip to Cambodia and the subsequent trips, they just really changed my perspective on everything about my family life, my kids, even how I approach the world. Back in 2010, I had only been at this church at Pathfinder for a year. The then senior pastor, Steve Hauer, told me that we were going to do a big capital campaign, and part of that capital campaign was going to be to do something big in mission, that we would have an impact on mission, not just in preaching the gospel, but really helping people in a whole life kind of way. Even back then we were talking whole life. And so, I'd been here a year, and he said, Dion, you're the guy who's going to take the point on this process. So over the course of months, I met with all different kinds of missionary directors over all the different continents where mission work is happening through our denomination. And in my mind, I thought for sure we would do something in Africa. But then I had a chance to meet with Dr. Pastor Phung Chau Tu Lo, who was a missionary in Cambodia, of all places. And I didn't know anything really about Cambodia. I knew where it was, but I didn't know much about the history. I knew it had something to do, was tangled up in the Vietnam War, but that was all I really knew about Cambodia. But when I met Pastor Phung, that's what he goes by, I immediately sensed that there was some kindred spirit thing happening, that he was a man who had a heart for his people in Cambodia the same way that we here at Pathfinder have a heart for people. And so that put me on this road of looking really deeply into what God was doing in Cambodia. In fact, it was October 11th, 2010, that I got on an airplane and went off to Southeast Asia just to see if this might be the place that God was calling us to go. And after about, it was like 12 or 14 days, I was convinced that this is where God was calling us. On my first visit to Cambodia, I got to spend time with Pastor Phung Chau Tu Lo, who was the missionary director. Really interesting guy. He had escaped as a kid from persecution in Laos, had lived in a refugee camp, saw family members die in a refugee camp, came over to America at like 13, didn't speak English, had lived here, loved America, never wanted to go back to Southeast Asia, and felt like God called him back to Southeast Asia. So Pastor Phung was just this really impressive guy. What I didn't count on as I went to Cambodia the first time was this unknown character by the name of Jesse. That's all I knew him as, Jesse. But Jesse was a native Khmer, a native Cambodian man who was working with Pastor Phung at the time. I knew he had some level of like Bible training, or some Christian leader at some point had seen something in him. And so he started working with Phung, and he was kind of like the logistical director of our trip. Jesse was just really into making sure we got from point A to point B. But when I met Jesse, as much as I love Phung, when I met Jesse, I thought, wow, this guy, he's the most lovable guy. He has such a heart for his people, the Cambodian people, and was such an easy guy to connect with. And so I didn't realize at that time that Jesse would actually become our entire lifeline to the ongoing work that we still have today in Cambodia.
I am Jesse, and I am a Lutheran ordained pastor, and I am married. I have 3 children, and my wife and I are privileged both serving at Stronghold Cambodia. I was called to serve with the RCMS World Mission as a logistic coordinator and translator for RCMS And then at that time, we worked closely with St. John, who is Pathfinder now. So they had sent the mission team every year to LCMI's office in Phnom Penh to do the project, like teaching project and like physical project, like building the houses, the churches.
The way we got started with Stronghold Cambodia was very much of a God thing. When Tim turned 60, he got notice from his job that he was laid off. Initially, we just freaked out about that. I was working as a school nurse at that time. And so we just kind of laid low a little bit as we freaked out, but that didn't really help. We did what we knew we needed to do, just sat down and really started praying about it. Looking at the Bible, being close with God, quiet time. And it seemed that the more we sought him out, the more we got some answers. Now, I had gone on some mission trips with our boys in that time, and Tim had never done that.
I had worked in aerospace, so I had security reasons for not going. I had always been interested in mission work. In fact, I remember as a child, my mom and dad said, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" "I want to be a missionary."
We came to understand that God himself was calling us to something. And he was calling us to retire at this time, but not to just retire and trust him, but he was going to take us on an adventure. So what he called us to do was to tithe our retirement in service to him. And because we were a part of Pathfinder at that time, heard stuff about this whole Cambodia thing. There'd been a whole capital campaign about that. It was an easy step to think, oh, maybe this is something that God's talking to us about. So our next stop was meeting with Dion.
I have known Tim and Diane Esla since 2000 or 2001. When I was in seminary, I was at a church here in St. Louis as a field worker, and they were a part of that church. And if you know Tim and Diane Esla, they are strangers to no one. And so as this seminary student who didn't really know many people, I immediately got to know them. And so I was shocked when years later, almost a decade later, I came back to St. Louis and I came here to Pathfinder, and I discovered that they were now here at Pathfinder. I was even more shocked the day that they asked me for a meeting. And when you're a pastor and someone in your church, especially someone you love a lot and respect a lot, asks you for a meeting, it kind of stops your heart, because you're like, oh no, did I do something to offend you? Are you angry with me for something? Are you leaving our church? And Tim and Diane came in and they asked me about, my family and how everything was going, and just spent a lot of time listening to me. And then they said something, it was a conversation I'll never forget. They said something that went like this. They said, "We are getting near the time where we are going to retire. We have some opportunities ahead of us to maybe even retire early. And we have been faithful Christians, for most of our life. We've just tried to be faithful and committed. We are at a place now in our life where we want to be all in."
There's one book that was really instrumental. It's called All In. It's by Mark Batterson. We went into Dion's office to meet with him, and he said, "Why are the Eslas meeting? What's wrong with, what are they going through?" So we slammed the book down on the table. We are all in. We want to go to Cambodia.
We really needed pastor input on this. So we went and said, so what's happening in Cambodia? And things were happening.
It might have been at that time where they introduced the concept of tithing on their retirement. They said, we've been tithers our whole life. We've always given God our first fruits, and we want to do that with our retirement. We want to give God the first fruits of our retirement. And they said, we are just here because you're a pastor, and we want your prayer for us. We want to go all in. We want you to pray for us, and we want you to be aware that we are on this spiritual journey, and we just need your support and partnership in that. And so I said, just blown away by this conversation, because this is not the conversation I was expecting to have, and I hadn't had a lot of those conversations still up to this day with people. And so, of course, I told them, yeah, I'll absolutely pray for you, and we can pray about that right now. And then I also said to them, and I also think you should really check out what God's doing in Cambodia. They were so open to the possibility of just doing whatever God wanted them to do. We got them on a trip to Cambodia to begin to explore, and that began the now decade-long partnership of Tim and Diane Esla, Pathfinder members, who have more than tithed on their retirement, unless they're going to live for a really, really long time. They have been so pivotal, along with Jesse and Naomi, to this amazing thing that we've now seen come to be in Cambodia.
We were going to prayerfully created an organization called Angel Dormitory. So the Angel Dormitory original plan was to host a high school student from different provinces where they can stay with us in Phnom Penh, go to school, but at the same time we were providing them with English skill, computer skill, of course, the word of God, that they may learn about God as well.
As we moved into our relationship with Cambodia, the initial vision was, we wanted to provide a space, a home for orphans who, and there are lots of orphans in Cambodia, who needed full life love and care. And the vision was to basically build like a dormitory, a school where they would receive education, because in Cambodia, you only get a half a day's worth of school from the government. And if you really want to climb the rungs of economic success or have opportunity in the world, that's just not enough. And so the vision of this dormitory was to give them an additional half day of school, give them training they weren't getting in school, but also to teach them faith, to make sure they were well looked after, well nourished, that they were fed, that their spiritual needs were met. And that was the initial vision. And we had been moving forward toward that vision slowly and surely. And that's when things changed in a huge seismic way with our denomination. Our denomination went through some changes and a change of focus, and they decided that they needed to scale back their international mission efforts. And on the chopping block was essentially everything that was happening in Southeast Asia. And I still remember going with Jen Schultz, was our missions director at the time. I remember going with her to a meeting at the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod headquarters, and we weren't sure what was going on exactly. We knew things weren't going in a great direction. And they told us basically like, hey, we're done. We're recalling our missionaries. This thing is over. You can redirect your money towards something else, or, you could have your money back, I guess, if you really wanted to. And she and I were looking at each other in this meeting, just being like, what on earth? We had felt so sure that God was calling us to Cambodia, to this specific mission, that it just seemed impossible that this could all be over. We had poured ourselves into this for some amount of time. And we kind of, looking across the table at each other, we're like, I think we want our money back. And they didn't like that idea, of course. I think they would have rather had that money for other mission fields, but it was a cordial conversation. At the end of it, they told us they would make sure that the money that we had already put in as seed money would come back to us. And as Jen and I left the meeting that day, we looked at each other thinking, what are we going to do? But the thing that we knew is that we felt God was still calling us to move forward somehow with Cambodia, but it was now going to be without Pastor Fung, the missionary. He was being called home, and his whole support was being removed. Our only hope for a lifeline was that maybe God had in mind for Jesse to grow into even more of the leader that he could be, more than we had seen him be before. And maybe Jesse was going to be the key to seeing this work move forward. If we felt like things were upended, things were really crazy over in Phnom Penh, Cambodia, Pastor Fung was suddenly found out that, he found out he was being recalled back to the United States and had to figure out like, okay, what am I going to do? And Jesse, this man who had devoted himself to this missionary work, suddenly was losing his mentor, his whole support system. And so we spent a little bit of time Zooming back and forth with Jesse, not making too many promises yet, because we didn't know what would happen. We didn't know what was viable or even possible. Just staying connected with Jesse because we cared about him. And we had this belief that God wasn't done with us here yet to do work in Cambodia. And we had a belief that God was not done with that relationship yet. It took a long time for us to figure out how we would go forward and who our partners would be. Eventually, it amounted in us establishing Stronghold Cambodia, an independent NGO run by the leaders in Cambodia, an indigenous organization to be the umbrella that would house the work that we believe that God was calling us to do. But it took a long time for us to figure out how to get there. Lots of consulting with experts and lawyers, but by God's grace, we got there. One of the roles that we picked up here at Pathfinder and some of the partners that we were beginning to be connected with was to provide coaching and development and supervision for Jesse and for the partners that we had in Cambodia. It was clear to us that they had the expertise about the Khmer, the Cambodian people, and how to reach them. They had the knowledge of what does it take to reach our people and what do our people need. That was clear. It was clear to us that this was way beyond the scope of anything that any of them had ever done before. And so it amounted to weekly, and then I think maybe every couple of week coaching conversations, like supervisor one-on-ones. We were in a supervisory role over Jesse and the team and the work. And it was a beautiful partnership, but we were definitely bringing some expertise into the equation that Jesse himself didn't have and some of his Cambodian partners didn't have yet. And it was amazing to watch how quickly they learned and they grew and they started to really take the reins for what was happening, having important meetings with Cambodian officials. It was like the story of Gideon in the Bible, who starts off kind of afraid, and then God calls him, and Gideon suddenly goes from this guy who's hiding from the enemies to leading the charge against the enemies. It was amazing just to watch how God grew Jesse and the team there in confidence to be able to have really important high-level conversations with high-level government officials because they were so on fire for the mission and because the Spirit of God was working in them.
Because I had been working as a logistic coordinator, so I had very close relationship with the mission team from Pathfinder, especially with Pastor Dion. So that's how I get, that responsibility to continue with the angel dormitory. But after asking information, going to the government, the plan, it just did not work out as well. So they're encouraging us to create a place that we are working with the community and for the community.
It was this long and windy road that led us to Kampot, to Fish Island, where we are now. And finally, just in 2023, to the building of a permanent facility on land that primarily Pathfinder Church helped purchase. We had some other donors come in as well, but we built a forever home for Stronghold, a physical place that would be a stronghold, a refuge for not only kids, because the vision changed. It's not about housing kids overnight, but for kids during the day, but also for their parents, for their siblings, for an entire community to come together, to receive things that they need to grow as whole people, and also to hear more about the love of God. And along the way, Jesse, and I haven't mentioned yet his wife Naomi, but Jesse and his wife Naomi, a power couple if there ever was one, they led the charge and grew in ways beyond imagining. None of this would have happened without who God made Jesse to be and how God equipped Jesse and Naomi to be our people, our partners there on the ground. Now that Stronghold is established, which took 13 years to happen in the way that it is now that Stronghold's established, it's amazing to see the fruit of what it's doing, that it really is a life-giving community center. I mean, at the dedication of Stronghold, there was the village chief, I'm not exactly sure what his role is, but this Buddhist man, 96% of Cambodians are Buddhist. So this Buddhist man who was there at the dedication, telling the kids directly as their political leader that this was a good place and that they should listen to and receive everything they can from this place and open up their hearts to it. So it's just amazing to see how well the gospel has been received. And I don't think everyone understands it fully, but they're just wide open to the work. And I think that's because the heart of what we're doing through Stronghold is so undeniable that no one can find fault with it. So it's really exciting to imagine in the future how those relationships will deepen and blossom and the new connections that'll be made. And then one idea that's been on the table for a long time is, now that Stronghold's established, as we really figure this out, is this something that could actually happen in more places in Cambodia? Is this a model that could reach more communities and more kids to really help a nation that has just a horrifically dark and tragic history step into hope, not just the hope of economic development, but the hope of Jesus himself.
There's such a thing as God creating waves, and a wave is something that comes along and you have to know that it's there. People's hearts are opened to the gospel. There is a wave in Cambodia right now because it is so open for Christians to have gatherings, even large gatherings. There's no problem with churches. There's no problem with talking to people. So we need to catch the wave. And so that's what we hope people come alongside Stronghold to support them in catching the wave. From here, what we can do is financially support and prayerfully support so that they can catch the wave, so that as many people as possible can hear the gospel while the government and everybody else is open to it.
We are trying to raise our own people, with the gift and with the talent that they have. And then when they grow, it will be a joy for them to give, to Stronghold, to take care of Stronghold. So that's why it is important thing that we raise the leaders from Stronghold kids. They know what we are doing. They know how it is operate. It is their turn to give back to the Lord, to give to Stronghold Cambodia. Just like me, I'm grown from this kind of fashion, church and Christian. So you cannot overlook that blessing.
Now that Stronghold is established on land in a facility that's designed for exactly the purposes that it needs, funded by in large part from the people here at Pathfinder Church. Now that Stronghold is established, I know that Stronghold will be exactly what its name says. It will be a shade, a refuge, a firm foundation for kids in Cambodia to grow up into whoever God has in mind for them to be, not only them, but their whole families. I know that Stronghold will be a blessing to those families and ultimately the whole kingdom of wonder, the whole nation of Cambodia.
I cannot express enough thanks to the Pathfinder. You still have been very generous, very supportive, and then your partnership is very important with us, to continue to raise the leader, to continue to train the people. I just appreciate and continue to partner with us that we're able to do more work for the Lord. In His timing, Cambodian people will be able to stand our own feet and then look after our own church and then helping our own people in teaching or equipping and telling our own people about Jesus by ourselves.